Hi friends, in this video we are going to discuss about the topic pecking order theory. We are discussing this particular theory in your unit business finance. And when you are considering this pecking order theory, which is actually a very important topic, when you are taking the previous year question, you can see that a number of questions is actually asked from this particular topic, even for commerce and management students. Okay, so we are actually discussing the this particular theory under capital structure theory. So we know that there are different categories of capital structure theories is there. So when you're considering about capital structure, what is a capital structure? Capital structure means it's a combination, or it's actually it's a combination of the funds which is collected from a various sources. Like you are making or you're making an analysis, or you're making a division between how the funds to be collected from the public or from different sources to the particular company, the amount which they needed or how they are actually collecting. Okay, that means if that particular company needs rupees 10 lakh, how they are going to collect this 10 lakh, either it can be retained earnings, or they can go for debt securities, or they can use equity, preference shares, so and bonds can also be used. So there are a number of sources which is available, and how much they are using, or what about the proportion that they are using for each of the funds or each of the sources to the firm for this fund collection. So this is also a theory, or this theory is also saying about how to collect, or it is actually giving you a sequence or a logical sequence or a proper order that how the funds to be collected. That means first priority, we have to give the first priority to which fund or which source, second priority to which source. Like a way it is giving you an order how the funds to be collected. Okay, so this particular theory was actually suggested by Donaldson. Later in 1984, that was modified by Myers and Majeleff, and that by that such a modification, this particular theory came into much popular. So this particular theory is based on the concept of asymmetric information. So what do you mean by the term asymmetric information, or you can also refer it as information failure, which occurs when one party possesses more or better information than another party, which causes an imbalance between the transaction power. So when you're comparing with managers and the prospective investors, you can see that managers will hold much more information than these investors, because we know that they are working within the firm, or they are insiders, so they will get more information. Okay, they will have a better idea about the organization in all aspects. But when you're comparing it with the the investors, prospective investors, they will get much more. The comparison, when you're making a comparison, we know that they are going to get only a fewer or very little amount of information that is actually happening within a organization. So that is actually referred as asymmetric information. There is an asymmetry between the information which is related to managers and the prospective investors in that particular, which is related to that particular organization. So there is an information failure. That's why we are also calling asymmetric information as a information failure. So you can see that this company managers typically possess more information regarding the company's performance, prospectus, risk and future outlook than external users such as creditors, debt holders and investors share. That investors means we are normally referring it related to shareholders. So in this situation, we know that the managers is working within the organization. They will have a much better idea about the organization, how it is performing, what about its future prospectus or the risk that particular firm is possessing. So they know about all this. They have a clear picture about all these things. But when you're comparing it with the external users or the investors, we know that they are not going to hold a very much clear information as much as that is held by the managers. Okay, that is the asymmetric. Okay, there is a asymmetric information between these parties. So based on this, so we know that these external users or these people hold a fewer information. The risk, when you're considering about the risk from their perspective, it's just much higher because they are not able to identify, or they having much a clear picture about the future prospectus or the risk that particular company holds. In that situation, they have or they are taking more risk, right? So the external parties is actually taking much more risk. In essence, due to information asymmetry, external sources of finance demand a higher rate of return to compensate for a higher risk. They are taking higher risk. So when we are taking higher risk, what does that mean? You need more return. Why we are taking more risk? Because we need more return. So here these peoples are taking more risk. As a result, they should get more return. That's a thing which is actually happening here. So in this situation, it's always preferable that it is, firstly, it is better to go for a retained earnings. Retained earnings means we know that it is a part of profit which is already retained in the business for some future purpose. So we know that its cost is much, it is cheaper source of fund, right? So in that situation, firstly, a firm, when a particular company needs fund, firstly they should depend on a retained earnings. Okay, that's a first priority, or that must be the first one that company should prefer. Okay, so the first one is retained earnings. So which is an internal financing, because they are using or they are financing from the firm itself. So which comes directly from the company and minimizes the information asymmetry. There is no need of thinking about this information asymmetry, because which is happening within the organization and nobody is going to take risk, right? So when a company finances an investment opportunity through external financing like debt or equity, a higher return is demanded. So firstly, they should go for retained earnings because there is no information asymmetry. So in that situation, it is better to go for that. Otherwise, if they are going to depend on any external sources, in that situation, they need to give much more, or the company needs to incur more cost. Cost of capital will be increased. Okay, so the first one they should always prefer is retained earnings. Okay, in terms of external financing, managers prefer to use debt over equity. And when you're considering about the second phase, firstly, you are going to depend only on a retained earnings, but you need fund. Again, you need fund. What about the situation? You have debt or equity preference, all these is there. And what about your preference? Firstly, you will go for, when you're comparing it with debt and equity, you will go for debt. We know that debt is a cheaper source of fund when you're comparing it with the equity. Okay, so when you're making a comparison between debt and equity, which is more cheaper, debt is more cheaper. So in that situation, your second preference will go to debt. And the final option, finally only, that means if you have no other option, you need, again, if the company needs more fund, then only you will go for a equity. That is your last portion. Okay, that's your last dependence. Firstly, you will go for retained earnings, then you will go for debt, then maybe you can go for preference shares, and finally at the last stage only you are going to depend on equity funds. Okay, so when you are making it on a priority basis, the first one, retained earnings, then debt, then preference shares, and finally it's about equity shares. So the first one should be retained earnings and the last one is equity. That's a very important point that you should keep in your mind. So retained earnings, debenture, preference and equity. Okay, so that's the order. So when you're comparing with the remaining things, that means debt, preference shares, equity shares, we know that the risk is actually increasing. When you're comparing it with the debt and preference share is much more riskier. Then when you're comparing it with equity shares, equity shareholders is taking more risk. So as they are taking higher risk, you should give them higher return. Okay, so it is better to choose them as a last option. Okay, so retained earnings, debt, preference shares and equity shares. So this topic is very important. So when you're taking this particular portion, it's a very small area to be covered. But when you're considering the previous year question from this area, you can see that how much important this area is for both for commerce and management students. Okay, I will just show you the question which got asked in October 2020 for commerce students. Arrange the following financing choices in order of preference suggested by pecking order theory. So you need to arrange these three sources in order as per pecking order theory. So reinvestment of earnings, new issue of equity, issue of debt. Okay, so it's a very direct question. As you can see that firstly we need to depend on retained earnings. Retained earnings and reinvestment of earnings, both these are same. That means they are from the earnings or from the profit, they are again reinvesting in the business. That is retained earnings. We'll also call it as plowing back of profit. Okay, so one should be there. That's the first one. So there are two options which starts with 1. Then second one, new issue of equity. New issue of equity is the last source that you need to depend as per pecking order theory. Then you can go for a issue of debt. And finally, it's about equity. So 1, 3 and 2. 1, 3 and 2. Yes. The correct answer for this question is option C. So again another question on the same year which is actually asked for management students. Based on asymmetric information, managers prefer to finance firm's capital structure in which order as postulated in pecking order theory. Again, the question is same. The question is same, but when you are coming to the options, you can see that 4 options is there. First one is retained earnings and internal sources. Second one, external debt financing. C, hybrid security and convertible bonds. Finally, D, new issue of equity shares. Again, firstly, we know that we need to depend on retained earnings and that is internal financing. So, A. Then, what about next? You should go through debt. Okay, we know that the final option is actually equity. So, after debt financing, you can actually go for these bonds. So, the option itself is same. It's in a correct order. A, B, C, D. So, when you are coming through the options, yes, option B, which is A, B, C and finally it's D. So, anyway, you know that the first one you need to depend is always retained earnings and the last one you should go for is equity. So, in that sense also you can actually go for this particular answer. So, the correct answer for this question is option B. And next question on December 2020 and June 2021 cycle. For commerce students on 25th 11/2021, shift 1. Pecking order theory in finance is based on assertion of. So, what is actually the basis for this pecking order theory? So, the first one, asymmetric information between managers and investors, symmetric information between managers and investors, outside information, D, asymmetric information among investors only. So, actually when you are going through the previous year question of this management, you can actually see that in this question itself they got actually referred based on asymmetric information. Okay, so that asymmetric information, that word is actually specified in the previous year question itself. Okay, so and after for the next exam they give the importance to that area. Okay, so what is actually the basis for this particular theory? Asymmetric information between managers and investors. What about option B? Symmetric. Symmetric means similar information, which is not correct. Outside information, which is not correct. Asymmetric information about investors only. It is not within the investors. When you are comparing it with investors and managers, you can find a dissimilarity in that case. So, it is about the asymmetric information between managers and investors. Okay, so I hope you understand how much important that you should go through the various questions which got asked from a similar topic. Okay, even it's for commerce or management students. Anyway, the correct answer for this question is option A, that is asymmetric information between managers and investors. So in this video, we discussed about a very important theory, which is pecking order theory. So you should be very aware about the order which is related to pecking order theory and the various bases and why this particular priority or such an order is given based on this theory. All these are very important. So I hope this video will help you for your preparation. Thank you and happy learning.